أصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم ارزقنا أدبا معك وأدبا مع جميع أنبيائك وأدبا مع قرآنك وأدبا مع جميع ورثة الأنبياء أجمعين، وبارك علينا وعلى جميع مشايخنا والمعلمين. Alhamdulillah, in our discussions of the beginning of guidance by Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, the Hujjatul Islam, as he is known as, the proof of Islam, right? And his biography is very, very central to the way that he writes and the style that he uses to explain these realities, right? Because his early life, right, he was what he speaks against in his later life. That he is speaking to his old self, in essence. And it's important because the one who has been through the delusion and the deception, right, and has made it through the other side is more, right, has more insight on those realities than someone who hasn't. Right? As Sheikh Hamza mentioned, he has a friend who had a severe drug addiction before, but then he became Muslim. And the friend said to him that the true believer is not the one who wants to go to heaven. The true believer is not the one who wants to go to paradise. The true believer who's the one who has already been through hell and does not want to go back. Right? Because those who have lived, right, and those who have experienced depravity and not this disattachment to Allah, right, generally, not all the time, understand, right, more about what it means to not have that. Right? So today he talks about etiquette, right? And he talks about the etiquettes of the scholar, right? How a scholar should be, and then he talks about how a student should be with their teachers. Right? And this idea of etiquettes in the scholastic sense, meaning in the sphere of knowledge and learning, right, is something that modern academia does not have, right, to its fullest extent. Right? You might have some individuals who have etiquette, right, to their professors and to otherwise, but the norm is no, that there's not. Right? Either someone really likes their professor, right, and then they have respect because of that, right, or they don't and they say whatever they want about them in private or even straight to their face. Right? To be blunt about it, right? I've seen many things. I've seen teachers take much abuse, but Islamically, etiquette, this adab, and adab in Arabic is a beautiful word. Etiquette is more of like don't put your elbows on the table kind of thing. When I think of the word etiquette, I think of, cover your mouth when you sneeze. That's especially nowadays. Right? But it's deeper than that. That this is etiquette. That even if there's no way to tell on the outward, that person still holds on to it inwardly. That there's an etiquette of the heart. Right? And this etiquette of the heart, right, as you took with Sheikh Faraz last week about etiquette with Allah. Right? That etiquette with Allah, in essence, is understanding that we are slaves, right? True slaves and servants of Allah, right? And that the fact that Allah knows what we're thinking, right, means that it has to be in the heart. To have etiquette with Allah, it has to be in the heart, right? It shows up on the limbs, but it has to be in the heart, right? But now we're talking about etiquette with people, with humans, right? And it's very easy to tell oneself that, oh, they don't know what I'm thinking. Right? That's not etiquette. Because etiquette is the way that someone acts in the absence of the disciplinary. of the person teaching discipline. So the parent is making ta'deeb of the children. Ta'deeb comes from the same word as adab. Ta'deeb is to teach them adab, right? Discipline, to discipline them. But whether the child has adab or not depends on how they act when the parent is not there, not how they act when the parent is there. Right? Because how they act when the parent is there could be many factors. It could be fear. Right? It could be possible a fear of loss, of being punished, for instance. Right? But how they act in the absence of that parent is true adab. Right? And that's where the good, the well-mannered child is distinguished from the one who's not. Right? Even though the one who's not may outwardly be very nice in the presence of the parent, but then they go outside and... Right? So this instillment of adab is an instillment of adab in the heart. Right? And respect is at the pinnacle of our religion. Right? Veneration and respect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِن تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Whoever esteems the symbols of Allah, the sha'air, that which reminds you of Allah, right? Then that is a sign of taqwa of their heart. And taqwa, as the Prophet said, taqwa hahuna, taqwa is in the heart. Right? So if you see somebody who has etiquette in the masjid, etiquette with the Quran, right? Etiquette with their teachers, because the teachers are the inheritors of the prophets and the means by which they can learn what Allah wants from them, right? How they have etiquette with their students if they are the teacher, how they have etiquette with their parents, because Allah has made the status of the parents. Allah says in the Quran, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And we'll talk about this, but he says, and your Lord has decreed that you do not worship anyone other than Him, and that you do well to your parents. He's combined doing well to the parents with Tawheed, with true monotheism. Right? So, etiquette with the parents. Right? All of these are part of our deen. Respecting the elder is part of our deen. Respecting the person who's memorized the Quran is part of our deen. Right? Imam al-Nawawi, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that inna min ijlalillahi ta'ala, right? Verily, from one's veneration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ikram di shaybati muslim, is that they ennoble the elder Muslim. The shayba is the gray hair, right? The elder Muslim. They have respect for elder Muslim. That's the way that they venerate Allah is through having respect to the elder Muslim, right? وَحَامِلِينَ الْقُرْآنِ غَيْرِ غَادٍ فِيهِ وَلَا جَافٍ عَنْهُ, right? And that they have respect for the carrier of the Quran, the one who memorized the Quran, who is not in excess nor remissness in acting on it. They live up to they memorize the Quran and they act on it, right? وَالْإِمَامِ وَالسُّلْطَانِ عَادِلٍ, right? And the just ruler, right? So respect those three is part of venerating Allah. Right? So in the modern context, especially because we're talking now, the first part he talks about, we've already taken that etiquette with Allah, correct, last week with Shaykh Faraz. Now he's talking about the creation. How do we have etiquette with the creation? Right, the first is that he talks about the etiquettes of the scholar. How the scholar, the knowledgeable person, right, and the alim is the one who has knowledge. Right? Anybody who knows something in the religion properly, then they are an alim in that thing. They are an alim in that thing. They are a scholar. So for instance, if you know how to read Surah Fatiha properly, you're a scholar of Surah Fatiha. Right? So with that comes a great blessing, and with that comes responsibility. If somebody you know, convert, doesn't know Fatiha, has no one else to go to, there's a responsibility there, right? To convey. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever is asked about a portion, some subject of knowledge, right, and conceals it intentionally, then Allah will put a bridle of fire in their mouth on the Day of Judgment. Right? But this is obviously the one they have proper knowledge about it, right? And it's something that person needs to know, right? Somebody comes and asks you, what is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's first wife's name, right? even though you know it, you don't have to. It's not an obligation. You don't have to fear hellfire for not answering Asma binti Urwais or Mace, right? Right. So this etiquette with humans, right, can prove difficult for many people. And many different cultures, it will be easier for them. In some cultures, it'll be very strange, right? And having been blessed to be able to travel to a lot of the Eastern countries, Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, right? You can find that deeply enrooted in the culture is respect. Right? There's a respect for the elders. There's a respect for especially scholars, right? Especially the Mus'haf, the Quran, right? Like in some places, if you point your feet at somebody, it's as if you killed them, right? Or you tried to kill them, right? It's absolute disrespect, right? If you put the Quran on the floor in some masjids, you might get chased out, right? Whereas if you go to some of this relates to culture. That's a reality, right? Because respect is a matter of the heart. Sometimes, right, in certain cultures, what would be considered disrespect is not considered disrespect in another culture. Like, for instance, where I studied in New York, right, and even in Tarim as well, right, if you were to lay down in class, that's just rude, right? But if you go to like West Africa, they do the whole class like this. Like literally, there's pictures of the student, the teacher, everyone, right? Everyone's, but it's not that in their culture. That's not, right? That's not. It's not a point of disrespect, right? So and this is where a person who is well traveled, right, and well open-minded and well versed in different cultures can navigate the masjid better, because for instance, like a convert, right, navigating the masjid is a science. Right? Knowing what is considered the standard of respect and etiquette in this masjid. If you go to like a West African masjid, it might be different than if you go to, for instance, a Southeast Asian masjid. Or right? I've literally seen a friend of mine, may Allah bless him, Mufti Niyaz. He was teaching Arabic. Literally, one of the students full out on his back like this, flat on the ground, right? And he's like, yeah, he's learning, right? But some people need to learn, right? But generally, students were taught how to have etiquette. We can't assume that people are born to knowing these things, right? That's not a reality, right? And the Prophet taught the Sahaba etiquette, right? But part of their etiquette was natural because of their respect for the Prophet. Right? They mentioned that كَأَنَّ عَلَى رُؤُوسِهِمُ الطَّيْرِ, that they would sit in front of the Prophet as if there were birds perched on their heads, right? Still, completely still. Right? The physical description of the Prophet ﷺ does not come from the adult Sahaba. Right? Many of the Sahaba said, "Lam yamtali' aynaya min wajhi Rasulillahi qattu." My eyes have never been full of the face of the Prophet ever. He never fully stared at the Prophet's face. Right? That they would look down in his presence. Right? To a secular person, that would seem very strange. Right? But look at the reality that they would look down. And what the description that we do have, most of it comes from children of the Sahaba, Hassan and Hussein and others. Right? They wouldn't look at the Prophet. Right? They wouldn't stare at him. Right? One of the companions of the Prophet was caught by Abu Sufyan prior to his Islam, prior to Abu Sufyan becoming Muslim. Right? And they had him tied up and they were about to kill him. So they said to him, "Wouldn't you like that you were at home in the comfort of your family and the Prophet was here in your place and Muhammad was here in your place?" Right? He said that I would not wish, right, in exchange for me being home with my family, that the Prophet had a prick on his finger. Right? And then Abu Sufyan, he said that مَا رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا يُعَظِّمُ أَحَدًا كَتَعْظِيمِ أَصْحَابِ مُحَمَّدٍ مُحَمَّدًا. That I have not seen anyone venerate another the way that the companions of Muhammad venerate Muhammad. Yeah, that's it.
What about eye contact in general? Is that as part of etiquette? Did the Prophet?
Yeah, so that would be different cultures. In different countries, if you don't look at the person, then
nothing in this is sunnah.
No, it's not. There's no specific.
Talked about.
Yeah. So some things are shared. Some things are obvious, right? But some things are cultural. Right? So the idea is to uphold the standard of that, of one's culture, or the norm of where one lives. Right? So the Sahaba, they had that with the Prophet, right? In his presence, at home, without his, right? Outside of his presence, right? They had that even after he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. With his grave, they had etiquette with his grave. One of the rulers, right, Marwan, he came to the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he saw that there was a person literally like on his knees at the grave of the Prophet. This is before it was closed off, right? With his head on there and crying. His head's on the grave and crying. So the king, he went up to the person and said, "What are you doing?" Right? And then the person raised his head. It was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Is the Sahabi, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the person who the Prophet lived with when he first came to Medina. So he said, "Ataytu Muhammadan wa lam ati hajaran." I came to the Prophet. I didn't come to rocks, right? Because the grave there's rocks, right? But he understood it as much greater meaning, right? And even though it is against the etiquette when visiting the deceased to touch the grave or to kiss it but out of if one is overwhelmed with, right, love for the Prophet and they miss the Prophet, and then they're excused. And the etiquette is, as Imam Nawawi says, to stand away from the deceased, the grave, the same distance that you would stay away from them if you were talking to them in their life, right? And etiquettes when visiting the Prophet ﷺ is something that is being ripped away slowly but surely at this time. Anybody's been to Umrah recently or to Medina recently? Yeah? When you went to pass the Rawdah of the Prophet, what happened?
It can get really physical in that area.
Yeah, they push you out.
A lot of pushing, some pushing, people are clamoring sometimes.
Yelling, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
You always take it that, it's out of genuine love or want, clamoring for the beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Yeah.
But it does get physical in that area, especially when you're waiting to get.
Yeah, but my question is about like those who are in charge.
Yeah, that's very strict. Very
Yeah, they yell at you, turn, face the Kaaba, the Prophet's dead.
Aren't they trying to even get rid of the grave? The Saudis have taken graves away of all.
They've taken many graves away.
Yeah,
Right?
so even the Prophet's grave.
Okay. Yeah, but that's good luck. Good luck. It's actually, historically, people have tried to do things, but they've all failed. But they say, turn away, mats, he's dead. A'udhu billah. Right? What kind of etiquette? It says right above the Rawdah, right? لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Oh, you who believe, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yelling in front of, right? Imam Nawawi says that it's in the etiquette. And Imam Nawawi he's one of the elites of both the Shafi'i madhab in fiqh and in hadith. Right? He is definitely a marja', a source. So he says that the etiquettes of visiting the Prophet ﷺ is that you turn your back to the Kaaba. You face the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Out of respect. Right? And he says that because if it wasn't for the Prophet, we wouldn't even know about the Kaaba. Right? So,
did you say when walking past you said the
Rawdah? Rawdah is the name that they for the grave area of the Prophet ﷺ. Rawdah with a dad. The big, yeah. Right. So that was kind of an introduction that why there's etiquette. And the Prophet, Allah tells the Sahaba in many places about how they should have etiquette with the Prophet. There's a whole chapter of Surah An-Nur, right, about entering the house of the Prophet. Don't enter the houses of the Prophets, right, unless you're called to eat. And when you're done eating, go. Don't sit around and chit-chat, right? And the Sahaba, they held to these, right, unless it's permitted by the Prophet, right? Because they didn't have separate rooms. The house was one room, and one narration that his wife was sitting in the corner, facing the wall, waiting for them to leave, and they would just keep going on and going on. Right, so let's jump into the book, kind of extra long intro. Right, but it's not as right, in Western societies, unfortunately, but with exceptions, with great exceptions. Many families, right, they teach their children etiquette, right, both outwardly, right, please, thank you, open the door for elders, hold the chair for ladies first, right. These are things that were obvious when I was raised, like, right? But they're slowly. So some families are still holding on to it, but right, any secular society is going to have a lot less, or at least to a lesser level, especially the etiquette of the heart toward. Right, so the etiquettes for the scholar themselves, right? And I've listed it, just so if anyone wants to review it later. Right, so we'll just read it quickly, and then there's some of them that need to be a bit explained more so in the second part. So he says that if you are a scholar or a teacher, right? And we mentioned that everyone is a scholar according to what they know, right? So in that level. But here he's talking about the actual scholar, right? Who has, right? So that having ample tolerance. So as scholars, right, they tend to have to deal with a lot of different types of people, right? So there's a level of tolerance. Somebody might come and ask a question in a very rude way, but they might not know how to have etiquette, right? To be tolerant, to be forbearing, forgiving, right? To sit with dignity and respect in gatherings. And this is important, right? Because a person who has Islamic knowledge and is known for that, right, that any of their actions is going to reverberate on other scholars and the way that people perceive the deen. Because if people lose respect for scholarship, that's the basis of the crumbling of the deen. Right? Because our deen was passed down through scholars, both male and female. Right? Back to the Prophet ﷺ, who said that the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. Right, so now they are representing something much greater than themselves, so they must act accordingly. Sit with dignity and respect in gatherings. Refrain from haughtiness toward all the slaves of Allah, but still being humble, right? Humbling themselves. Right? Give preference to lowly status, right, in gatherings, right? Not needing to be put in the front of every gathering. Right? Many of my teachers, they would come in the masjid and sit down in the back. You wouldn't even know that they were there. They would come in, immediately sit down, right? Because if anybody saw them, they would get up, come sit in the front, right? And they would prefer to sit in the back, right? And I've seen many elite scholars, right, sit in the presence of other scholars with a notebook and taking, and even tangibly, if you guys noticed. I don't know if any of you guys were at the retreat. A few of you were, right? The retreat in Muskoka, I think it's called, right? You have Sheikh Yahya teaching, Ustadh Amjad is taking notes. Ustadh Amjad is teaching, Sheikh Yahya is taking notes. Etiquette, right? Respect, humility as well, right? Right. So then, right, avoiding jesting and joking, right, to a level that will diminish other people's respect for them. Right? Being gentle with students, being patient. And anybody who's dealt with tulab al-ilm, students of sacred knowledge, they know that there needs to be more than just a pinch of salt of patience sometimes. Right? Have composure with haughty questioners. Somebody comes and says, my sheikh said this. Right? That's wrong, sheikh. Right? Many times, but patience. Right? People are at different levels, right? And we deal with each person according to their level. And people came to the Prophet saying very rude things, right? Questions, right? Like the one Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, give me permission to do zina. Right?
Give me permission to what?
To fornicate. Zina, yeah. Right? Another Sahaba said, the Prophet talked about Hajj. He said, Ya Rasulullah, every year we have to do Hajj? The Prophet ignored him. He said, Ya Rasulullah, every year we have to do Hajj? Like you would get the point, right? He ignored him. Again, he still didn't get the point. Ya Rasulullah, every year we have to do Hajj? He said to him, he said, look, لو قلت نعم لوجبت. Like, if I were to say yes, it would have been obligatory and you wouldn't have been able to do it. Right? I mean, take it easy. Right? He says, this is what the translator, it's translated, so I don't use this word. Guide the dim-witted and do not become annoyed with them. Right? Right? Don't be too proud to say, I don't know. Very important. Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was known that if he was not 100% sure about an answer, he would say, I don't know. I don't know. So one person came from a faraway land with a list of questions from his people. Imam Malik answered a few of them and said, I don't know to the rest of them. And the man said, what am I going to say to my people? So he said, tell them, Imam Malik doesn't know. That's it. It's not about ego. Right? What are they going to think about me? I don't know this, right? Because there's a trust, there's a responsibility to transmit exactly how one learned, right? Not make up things, right? Accept others' proof in debates, right? This is a specific type of situation that if they're debating amongst other scholars, if someone is right, then to accept it, right? But the being right or wrong is on basis of proof, right? What is the proof of that? Not on emotion, right? Submit to the truth when found. Imam Shafi'i says that whenever I have never debated anyone except that I prayed to Allah that Allah would manifest the truth on their tongue. So I can take the lower stance of saying, yes, you're right. But again, it's not a debate to prove that I'm right. No, it's the seeking of truth. Right? That the goal is to find out what is the truth. And then he says, deter the student from seeking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their knowledge. Important, right? And Imam Ghazali talks about this in prior to the first chapter, where he talks about the 3 different intentions that one could have in seeking knowledge. That one is people who seek knowledge in order for that to be a means of them obtaining the next life. Right? And that is praiseworthy. Those who seek knowledge, intending by means of it to gain status and worldly material gain in this world, but they know that that's wrong, that they know that they shouldn't be doing that, and he says that person's right, in jeopardy. They're in a dangerous state. If they repent before they die, then they're good. If they don't, then they're other than good. Right? And then the last person who just does it for the worldly things, right? And then last he says, encourage them to focus on priorities and self-rectification, right? To encourage the students not just to gather information, but to apply everything that they learn. Right? You learn a hadith, apply it. You learn a sunnah of the Prophet, apply it. You learn that this is something that is disliked, leave it. You know that this is something haram, then leave it off. Right? And that, so the teacher should facilitate that for the students. Right? That's the student's etiquette, but part of the teaching is not just teaching what's in the books, it's teaching, right? One, that how one should have etiquette with those books and how one should apply that to their lives. Because the goal is not just to make somebody else smart. Right? The goal is to make someone else beloved to Allah. Right? And the way of doing that is to know what Allah loves in order to bring it into one's life. Right? So that's the etiquette of the scholar. Right? Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, he would tell his students, وَسِّعُوا أَكْمَامَكُمْ وَعَظِّمُوا أَعْمَائِمَكُمْ. He would say that widen your sleeves, your cuffs of your sleeves, right? And make your turbans bigger. Right? And he said that the reason was that so that people know that they should come to you for their questions and not to someone else who doesn't have the requisite knowledge. Right? So the scholar is supposed to stand out, not to bring attention to themselves, but so that people will have respect for them. Because people respect on the basis of the outward. Right? If the guy's got patches in his clothes and he's walking, I'm nothing, right? People are going to believe that. You are nothing, so why would I go to you? I'm going to go to Sheikh so-and-so who's got a really cool turban. Right? It's a reality. It's right? So, right? But there's a limit. Right? It's not like a... So you see, like the scholars, especially scholars of our time, they dress very properly. Right? They're very clean. They always smell good. They wear the turban. But there's intentions behind that. great intentions. They would prefer to be unknown, but they have a trust. And because it's not just oneself, right? Anyone, there, at the time of the Sahaba, you had many Sahaba who preferred, right, to seclusion. They preferred, right, to have what's called badlah, right? They preferred shabby clothing, right? Other than, right, because there's hundreds of people at that time who were scholars. Any Sahaba you can get your answer from. A specific fatwa, there was a few Sahaba that were already doing it. And they would just tell them, go to this person, go to this person. Because they could. At this time, we can't do that. Right? People need to stand up and just play the role that Allah has blessed them to be in, and to help people to Allah. But it's, right, to constantly keep the heart in check, though. Because that big turban, people start saying, right, start praising in it, the heart is involved. Habib Ali Jifri, one person came up to him and said, Habib, can I have your turban? Right off the top of his head, his turban. Habib, he whispered to his khadim, his assistant, right, to go home really quick and get another turban and bring it. So he gave the man that one. He said, no, I want that one. The one on your head, right? So Habib, he took the new one, he put it on his head, and he gave him that one. Here you go. Right? There's a dignity, but there's also humility, right? And generally, especially the family of the Prophet, but they would never say no. Right? They may guide you to someone else or do this, right? Take these steps, but they don't say no. Right? And that was known about Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin, who Habib Ali is named after, actually. لولا تشهده لصار كل لأه نعم. If it wasn't for his tashahhud, then all of his no's would have been yeses. When in tashahhud you say La ilaha illallah, right? So how about the student? Right? The etiquettes of the student, many of them are taken from the hadith of Jibril alayhi salam. The hadith of Jibril alayhi salam, right? إذ طلع علينا رجل شديد البياض الثياب شديد سواد الشعر, right? As Umar radiallahu anhu narrates that we were sitting with the Prophet, and all of a sudden a man appeared who had extremely white clothing, right? Extremely dark hair. None of us knew him, and he had no traces of travel on him, right? And then he sat, right? جلس إلى النبي. He sat in front of the Prophet. فأسند ركبتيه إلى ركبتيه. And he put his knees to the knees of the Prophet. And he sat in the way that we sit at the end of the prayer. Right? That's why the tashahhud is called Jilsat Jibril. It's the sitting style of Jibril. Right? And he وَوَضَعَ يَدَيْهِ عَلَى فَخِذَيْهِ. And he put his hands on his lap, on his thighs. Right? So there's a lot of etiquette there, and then how he asked. Right? So a lot of it is taken from that a person should start seeking knowledge from a young age. Shadid al-Sawad al-Sha'r, his extremely black hair, is a sign of youth, that they should start studying from a young age, if possible. Right? So Shadid al-Bayad al-Thiyab, that his clothes were extremely white. One, that the student should have clean clothes, but preferably wear white. Right? Many of the Islamic seminaries, they actually make it part of the rules, the regulations of the madrasa, that you have to wear white. Right? And it's because of this hadith. Right? And then how to sit properly in front of it. Right? Many of the scholars, right, when they would turn their pages in the class, they would turn quietly so as not to disturb the teacher. Right? Some people would say that's extreme. Right? Yes, it's extreme etiquette, which is good. Right? They would not move a muscle, right, during the class. They wouldn't fidget around and do this. They would pay attention to the teacher. Right? So he says, right, that if you are a student, then uphold the following manners in the presence of the teacher. Right. So be the first to greet and offer salutations. Right, to greet the teacher first. Right, the Sahaba would say, Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah. Right. Do not speak too much in his presence. Right. Actually, I think this is a bit more detailed in the actual book, so let's read from the book. So we're all students here, so you can benefit from this. He says, if you are a student, then the manners of a student with the teacher are to be the first to greet and offer salutation of peace, which we've done, right? To say salam first. And this is A general sunnah. The Prophet said, Al-badi'u bis-salami bari'un min al-kibr. The one, bari'un min al-kibr. The one who starts, who initiates the salam is free from arrogance. Okay. أولي الناس بالله تعالى أبدأهم بالسلام. Those who are more deserving of a relationship with Allah are those who say the salam first. And he would do that even to children. He would say salam first. So he said to speak to, sorry, where were we? Not to speak too much to say the salam first, not to speak too much in his presence or her presence, if the scholar is a teacher, if the scholar is a woman. Right, not to speak unless asked something by the teacher. Right, and then practically, I've seen many of the students of Tareem, some of them the children of the main teachers, like alhamdulillah, we're blessed to be in the same class with Hamid bin Umar, Habib Umar's son. His etiquette was at the peak, but it never stopped him from asking a question if necessary, or clarifying something. So there's a balance between it. It's not just complete, because there's a purpose behind that. Both of us, we are teaming up. Teacher and student are teaming up to please Allah. Right? Then he says to ask questions, not to ask questions without first seeking permission. Right? We have the same idea now. Raise your hand. Right? Shouting out questions, unless that's the forum. He says not to say in contradiction to what the teacher has said, so and so, another scholar says something different from what you say. Right? And the first book that we studied in Darul Ulum in New York was Ta'lim al-Muta'allim Tariqat al-Ta'allum. It's a tongue twister. Teaching the students the method of learning. Right? And we, because these things are very new to us, especially me as the convert kid, right? That how to correct the teacher, because part of it is generally the teacher, they're not going to make major mistakes, right? Anybody who's of knowledge, but we're human, right? People are human, they make mistakes. Sometimes just because of speaking, they might switch the word here or there, right? But someone says that this is the opinion, right? But you've done your revision, you've done your homework, you've looked into the matter prior to the class, which the student should do. Right? You say that, right? How do you bring that up to the teacher without seeming to be in opposition? Right? One, they told us that you should ask the teacher, I found this, right? Well, what do we understand about this? What do we understand about this that I found in another book, right? So the way that it's worded, right? Same goal is attained. He says not to point out something contrary to his opinion, right? Except in that, in a manner that is necessary. Right? Thinking himself, not to point out something contrary to his opinion, thinking himself more learned than the teacher. Oh, the teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said that two people will never learn. Right? The one who's arrogant, right? And the one who is too shy to ask. Right? Because there's a blameworthy shyness. Someone needs to know something about the religion. Even the female Sahaba, right? They would go up and ask questions. Right? The other woman said, "You have embarrassed all the women." Right? And the Prophet praised her. He said that. Sayyidah Aisha, she said that, "May Allah bless the Ansar women because they never let their modesty stop them from obtaining the truth," because they had questions about some women issues. So he says, not to whisper to another student in his gathering. Right? That's generally disruptive to the class. We have this in secular schools as well. Right? Not to look around, right? But rather to sit with good manners, eyes downcast, as though in ritual prayer. So to sit attentively. Sorry, I keep losing my place. Not to burden with questions when he's tired or weary. Imam Malik, he would study from Nafi'. Imam Nafi' was the freed slave of Ibn Umar, who was a Sahabi. So between Imam Malik and the Sahaba was just Imam Nafi'. But Imam Nafi' was known to have a bit of a temperament, right? Just his personality. So Imam Malik would decisively and plan how can he angle to get the question that he wanted. He did stop him. Right? That personality did not stop him from seeking knowledge. Right? So what he would do, he said that he would wait to a certain time of the day when Imam Nafi would come out on his own. He wouldn't knock on the door, one. He would wait till Imam Nafi came out. Then he would say salam, right? And then go walk away. Just to make his presence known. I'm here. Assalamu alaikum, Imam. And walk away. Let him be. Give him some rest. Let him do what he's got to do. Right? And he said that I would stand at a distance, right, and let him do what he has to do. And then later on I would come over, right? And I would just say, well, what did Ibn Umar say about this, this, and this? And he would tell me, and then I would walk away. That was my lesson for the day. Right? So he wouldn't bother him, especially when the person 3 classes in a row, right? They're tired, right? But generally they would still answer even though they're tired. So he says to stand when he stands out of respect. Right? This is a problem for a lot of people. Stand up for them, right? Right? And then like standing in the Mawlid also, same idea, standing out of respect for the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So what's the ruling of standing? What's the ruling? Is it obligatory to stand? Is it recommended to stand? Is it permissible to stand? Is it disliked, somewhat disliked, or fully disliked, or haram? Just standing, not for anybody specific, but just standing. Permissible. You want to do it? Go ahead. You want to stand? Stand. Right? You want to sit? Sit. Permissible. Right? If that standing is coupled with veneration for something that Allah has venerated or someone who Allah has venerated, then how could it ever take any bad ruling? Right? The Prophet ﷺ, anytime his daughter Fatima would walk in the room, he would stand up, put his shawl down, give her his seat, and sit next to her after kissing her forehead. He stood up for his daughter, right? Respect. One time, the funeral of a Jewish person passed by the Prophet, he stood up, right? Out of respect for what? Out of respect for the gravity of death, right? And we stand in the Mawlid because the enormity of the blessing of the birth of the Prophet. Same principle, right? During Tabuk, certain Sahaba didn't go. They procrastinated a bit, right? And Allah admonished them in the Quran, right? Those 3 who stayed back with no excuse, right? So one of them was Ka'b bin Malik. And it's one of the longest hadith of all time. It's 4 pages long. It's Ka'b narrating his whole story, right? When revelation came that Ka'b was forgiven by Allah, right, he came to the masjid of the Prophet and Talha stood up. Right? Ka'b narrates in front of the Prophet sitting, Talha stood up for Ka'b out of happiness that Ka'b was now forgiven. And Ka'b narrates himself, "Lam ansa dhalika li Talha qattu." I've never forgotten that about Talha. He stood up out of respect for me. Right? Standing up, right, is part of our deen. What is prohibited is to want people to stand up for you. That is prohibited. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ taught that. He told them, don't stand up for me. Right? But that's not because your standing is haram, it's because no one should want to be stood for. Right? And many of the Sahaba stood up for other Sahaba, many of the Sahaba. And you will see that in the lives of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet came to Banu Qurayza and with Sa'ad bin Amr, who was originally their leader, then he became Muslim. Right? And he said to Bani Qurayza, "Qumu li sayyidikum," stand up for your master, for your leader. Stand up for your leader. He ordered them to stand up. Right? So standing, right? But no one should want that. Right?
What about bowing down?
Sorry?
What about bowing down? In certain cultures, not just standing.
No, bowing is prohibited. Bowing is prohibited. If it's right, kissing the hand is permitted. Right, but it shouldn't be done in a way that looks like a bow. Right? It looks like a bow. And culturally, some cultures, it's normal to kiss the elder's hand, right? To take their hand and kiss it, especially parents, even scholars, right? In Tarim, it's very normal. But Habib Umar, right, because when he would walk around, he would get attacked from all angles, everybody trying to grab his hand. Right? So they actually designated a time for everybody to line up, and they make a musafaha. Right? Imam Nawawi says if it's part of the culture, it's a good tradition to continue. And they would line up after Fajr. Everybody would go and make salam with everybody, not just Habib. Right? But Habib lifts his hand up. So it looks like, yeah, kiss my hand. No, it's not what he's doing. He doesn't want people to have to bend down to kiss his hand. Right? So that person's tall, higher. He'll put it, right? Because it looks like a bowing that's disliked. And because bowing is only for Allah Ta'ala. So stand when he stands, not to follow him from the gathering, right? And talking to him and asking him, right? Talking to him and asking him questions, right? After following him away, right? Not to ask him questions on the way to his home until he reaches there and grants permission, right? Not to form a bad opinion of him regarding actions that appear outwardly to be blameworthy, for he knows better his own personal affairs, right? One of the great scholars of the earlier centuries, his knowledge had reached a certain level that he not only knew his madhab, his school of thought, but he had such a deep knowledge of other madhab that he said himself that I never see anybody doing anything wrong. Right? Because I see this person, oh, that's the opinion of this imam. I see this person doing something, that's the opinion of this imam. Right? So a person who doesn't have much knowledge, right, they might know what they know. If somebody does something different than that, no, that's astaghfirullah, that shaykh is doing this. Right? How do you know it's not permissible in another thing? Maybe there's a reason behind it. Maybe he's not your madhab. Maybe there's many reasons, right? And sometimes we assume to be obligatory that which is not obligatory. Like, for instance, if you were to see, I'm not going to do it, right? If I stood up my left hand and drank this water and this tea, is it haram? No, it's not haram. Right? It's the sunnah of the Prophet, and it's rewarding to do it with the intention of following the Prophet. The right hand sitting, right? But in some places, if you did that, it's as if you've done kufr. I've been in situations like that. Right? So, because listen, but there's a limit, right? If something is clearly haram, right, then that we stay away from, right? And if someone were to ask, like for instance, if we see someone doing something haram, or we hear that some sheikh did something haram, should we not watch their videos or learn from them, right? One, we have a good opinion of everyone. We're not allowed to have a bad opinion of anyone, right? Two, is it authentic? Right? Just because people are saying it doesn't mean that it actually happened exactly the way that they said it. Right? Is it real? Right? We assume that it's not until proven otherwise. Right? If it is real, is what the thing that they're teaching, right? If it is real, is it haram? Okay, there's things that are very highly unbefitting for a scholar, but not haram. Right? Recently, some things have happened. One teacher did some things, right? Is it haram? No. Right? But it's highly undignified, right? And thirdly, is that the thing that they've done wrong, is that have anything to do with what they're teaching? Right? Right? Someone does something wrong on social media, right? You can still benefit from their tafsir. Right? Are they saying anything wrong? Right? But if it's clearly haram, but this is a general benefiting, that you're benefiting just from interesting points that they say, some wisdom that you learn from their talk, that's fine. But directly benefiting, and that's your mentor, and that's your spiritual guide, right? And that's a different story, right? That you should hold them. You should have high standards for a spiritual guide, or as Imam Haddad says, min ulama al-arifina bi rabbihim, that they should be knowledgeable of the Sharia, they should act on what they know, and they should have inward knowledge as well, amongst those who have completely purified their egos. That's the suitable guide, right, to them. So I think that's right. He gives the example of Musa and Khidr. Right? Khidr, right? Khidr did a lot of things that were outwardly wrong. He killed a child. SubhanAllah. Right? I've never seen anybody kill children amongst the shuyukh, amongst the scholars. Right? Alhamdulillah. Right? Right? He killed a child. He destroyed people. He vandalized property. Right? And then he built. Right? He built a house. And he built the wall of some orphans. That was not a bad one. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said that Rahimallahu Musa law sakata. The Prophet said that may Allah have mercy on Musa, on my brother Musa. Right? If only he had been patient, we would have learned much more from Khidr. Right? Because, right, so knowledge with, right, knowledge, etiquette with knowledge itself, right, entails etiquette with the teacher, etiquette with the student, and with the means of knowledge.
Etiquette of eating in front of the teacher?
Sorry?
Etiquette of eating in front of the teacher, is there anything specific?
Yeah, so like eating during the class and these things, I think that would be amongst the mushtaraka adab, the shared etiquettes around the world. Like in any culture, if you're teaching somebody and they're eating, if it's an actual class, right, that would be against etiquette. Maybe in some places, a cup of water, nobody would have any problem with that. Other places, even that. Why are you drinking? We can't drink before the class or after class. Right? But like in college, you can have your laptop open, you got your Starbucks coffee there, right? You got another phone under the table. Teacher doesn't care. He gets paid whether you come or not. Right? Not that they don't care. I'm sure there's many passionate teachers. I've certainly experienced many that they really love what they do and they really want to instill knowledge in others. Right? But discipline-wise, they might not say anything. And then, so this is the same type of etiquette that a child should have with their parent, and we'll talk about that. Right? But there's etiquette with the means of knowledge as well. Right? Because everything that is a means of us coming closer to Allah, whether directly or indirectly, deserves respect. Everything. Right? So, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ, the ultimate means of us knowing Allah is the messenger, therefore he deserves the ultimate respect. Right? The means of us knowing the Prophet, the companions, and then so on. So that, right? The means of us learning what the Prophet ﷺ taught is the scholars. They deserve respect. Right? But also the means of us learning are the books. Right? The books are a means of knowledge. Right? And Allah swears in the Quran about وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ. Right? Allah swears by the pen and that which it writes. Right? So Sheikh Hamza, he mentioned that he was, when he first went to West Africa, in Abu Dhabi with some West African scholars, that he took the pen and he was cleaning his nails. And they were like, what are you doing? Right? And he said, Allah swears by the pen. You're cleaning your nails with it? Right? I've seen people, right, putting pens in between their toes in the class, and the pen deserves respect. Right? And the more that we can adopt these adab, the more that there's that direct knowledge from Allah will be given. Because part of it is acquisitional. Part of knowledge is seeking. Spending time memorizing, diagramming, flashcards, learning words, right? Learning principles, thinking deeply, revising, reading other books in the same subject. That's part of it. And there's an etiquette, right? And there's an effort involved. But part of it is gifted by Allah. And Allah combines that gifting of His knowledge directly to the person on the basis of taqwa. And taqwa in essence is ultimate adab, ultimate etiquette. Allah says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Fear Allah and Allah will teach you. Allah will teach you. Right? So etiquette with the pens, right? Not to put pens on the floor. I have teachers personally that will never take a pen to the restroom, ever. They will leave it outside on the shelf. Right? But these are take from this whatever you wish. Right? But this is the extent that people have of great knowledge. And the reason why they've obtained that great knowledge is because of great respect. Paper, even blank paper. One of the great Hanafi scholars, Imam, if I'm not mistaken, Imam Karhi, he said that, Wallahi ma niltu hadha al-ilm illa bil-adab, illa bil-ta'zim. He said, I swear by Allah, I have not obtained this knowledge except through veneration and respect. Right? For Wallahi ma akhadhtu kaghidan illa ala tara. He says, I swear by Allah, I have never touched a single blank piece of paper. Kaghaz in Arabic. Kaghaz is from a Farsi word. Kaghidan in Arabic. I have never touched a blank piece of paper except with wudu, on the state of purity. And I have teachers that their entire, since they were children, since they started studying, they've never touched a single book without wudu. That when they need to use the restroom, they will put their book on the shelf, they will go in, use the restroom, make wudu, come out, and grab the book. They will never touch a single book without wudu. Right? Is it obligatory? No. It's obligatory for the Mus'haf, the Quran, translations of the Quran, right? Any tafsir that is majority Quran or has like a little window of Quran in it, and then it's obligatory, right? But it's highly recommended for books of knowledge, sacred knowledge. Right? I wouldn't go as far as like a geometry book or something, but okay. So the tables, right? Not stepping over books, how one stacks the books as well, right? So a fiqh book should not go over top of a tafsir book, because the fiqh is just a means of understanding the Quran, not the Quran itself. Right? Hadith should be above the fiqh book. Right? Arabic books generally are on the bottom because they're just a means. Right? They're not sought in and of themselves. They're a means to the Quran. The Quran is on the top. Not stepping over books, not putting books on the floor, ever. Not a notebook, not a book, not a pen. Right? But these things are, some places it's easier, some places it's not. But I just want to show that, just to show how much respect the scholars gave to their knowledge, and that's why they became who they became. As they say that in the tasawwuf, adabun, فَمَنْ زَادَكَ فِي الْأَدَبِ زَادَكَ فِي التَّصَوُّفِ. That the spiritual path is etiquette, is a path of etiquette. And whoever has more etiquette than you has more of the spiritual path than you. Tamam. Any questions on this? We kind of went like long-winded a bit.
In terms of teaching, you mentioned that, like, not scholarly, but just any person who knows, let's say, Al-Fatiha, right? And you can. What about concepts of ijaza or having permission to do so? Do you actually
Specifically for the Quran?
or anything that you mentioned that you should teach, even if it's small, right? Like if someone like asks me, doesn't know like Fatiha, should I like I've learned it, but let's say I don't have a chain per se, right?
Yeah.
If someone tells me what's your chain, then
What's your chain? So I conditioned it by saying that if someone knows any portion of knowledge, whether it be some surahs of the Quran or they know how to make tayammum, for instance. We took tayammum 2 weeks ago, right? Then if what they understood completely what they learned, and they learned it properly from a proper source, right, explained to them, right, and they know it, and they're confident that they know it, right, and they can share it with others, but to tell them that if you want more clarity, then go to so-and-so. But sometimes people, they need something now, like especially like Fatiha, that just tell them like, I know Fatiha at a basic level, right, but I'm not a qari, right, but I can teach you what I know, and then you can use that and go to someone else to refine it, right? So to incorporate in it kind of some fine line. Because it's part of it is the amana, the trust of it, that you don't want to be accountable for. Now they're going to go and do. So this is like not at all talking about fatwas and I heard someone say that this is permissible. No, because if they act on it, then we're accountable for everything. Right? And the Prophet has given concession to those who have an authority, right, to make decisions that if they're wrong, they still get rewarded. Because one, their error is not going to be grave, right? It's going to be within the limits of the Sharia, at least, right? And second, they have prerequisite knowledge. He said that the judge who judges and is correct gets 2 rewards, and the one who judges and is wrong gets 1 reward. Right? But that's with the prerequisite. Yeah. Barakallah fi. Any other questions about what we just did? Maybe from you guys, what would you say is the area where we least, right, that we least uphold these etiquettes that we've taken? So either from the teacher's end or from the student's end or from both. Where can we improve practically? Okay? I've been to madrasas, I've been to places where there's not a single table in the entire building. There's this one shelf, like far away, that has Qur'ans on it, right? Like where we studied, and it was kind of difficult for me in the beginning because the students, they would take their books and lean it against the wall like this, because there's nowhere to put anything. And if you're going to pray, you can't pray with the books in your hand, right? But they would put something, even something like this under it, if they're going to pray, or wrap it in this, right, in a shawl, or they'll lean it against the wall, not put it flat on the ground, right? They'll try their best, right? But practically, what can we do to uphold more etiquettes when we study, both in private and in public, right? When we're at home revising? Any suggestions?
I think because nowadays people are so connected online or in different ways to read about things, the bullet about do not assume yourself more learned than him or her, I think that people usually have an opinion
Yeah,
why they're correct.
that's true. I saw somebody sent this picture to me, I think by means of my family, that there was a doctor's office and they had a sign on the wall. It says that do not think that your Google search supersedes my 7 years of study. Because I think it's a common thing that we get sick, okay, what are these symptoms? Boom, we got our diagnosis, WebMD. Then we go to the doctor and say, well, I have this thing. They don't even mention the symptoms. We've already just mentioned the conclusion. Right? Wrong. Right? No. Right? And there's a lot of things online that are very deceiving, that are not from qualified scholarship, right? Or are not contextualized, right? That it may be a valid opinion, but what was the context? What was the condition, right? Is that the only opinion? Right? How do you know that that's the relied upon opinion, let alone, right? And then people, they search, they have no idea about schools of thought, madhabs, right? So-and-so said this. I've had people come to me, they're like a jigsaw puzzle of fiqh. Literally, the guy is like, he's like 2/4 Hanafi, 4/3 Shafi'i. He's got some Hanbali in there, right? He's really confused, very confused, right? And all of them are highly respected and amazing imams, right? But that confusion is not because of them, it's because of that person taking from, quick Google search, is this halal? You get a lot of, usually the first few things, don't click them, right? Because they have all the money. Right? I think you can pay to get your searches to be on the top, right? And it's in English and Arabic, don't click those. Right? Imam Hanifa says this, Imam Shafi says this, Imam Ahmed says this, but our shuyukh, who are more smart, or more learned than them, say this. Full stop. A'udhu billah. And so that is a tribulation. Sheikh Google, right? Fatwa shopping. Right? You guys are very blessed to have the Seekers Answer service. Right? There's very rare situations that I've typed in a search and they didn't have something to offer, right? With qualified scholarship all around the world. So. Any other?
I don't know if this qualifies, but in the mosque, usually on the women's side, I find whispering about that distracts the rest of the students.
Good.
The imam is still going on with his khutbah or something to talk, and then all of a sudden you can't hear nothing because there's so much
Is during the khutbah or during class?
During Ramadan, during khutbah, during anything that the Imam is not done with what he has to say, that already people are
Yeah.
getting up, whispering, and you can't
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I see this a lot.
Yeah, so things like that would fall under the category of sadda an sabilillah, that to avert people from the path of Allah, right? And that is one of the major sins that Allah mentions in the Quran. I mean, obviously there's different levels. They stopped the Sahaba from making Umrah, right? That's in Hudaybiyah. That's a big level. He's literally stopping them from accessing the Kaaba, right? But there's smaller levels of that, distracting somebody in their prayer, like talking loudly while somebody else is praying. If you're talking and then they decide to pray next to you, that's their choice, right? But there's a masjid, people are praying, right? And then some, as they say, like common sense is like deodorant. Those who need it don't have it, right? I've been a few masjids, right? Everybody's praying or in a class, right? Somebody comes in and says, "Whose car is parked outside?" It's the house of Allah. Right? There's tactful ways to deal with everything, right? But these types of things are prohibited, right? or highly disliked, especially in the masjid or a place where, like, if somebody wants to pray in the mall, they can't complain that people are making noise. That's your thing. Come on, right? But in the masjid, it's supposed to be a place of stillness and quietude, right? Even like people who say who sell things like during the khutbah. Come on, right? How can we teach our children these things, or teach ourselves these things? Like, do you feel that these things need to be learned, or that they should be kind of obvious?
It should be learned, but I have seen efforts, and even just my first time, not my first time, but when I said, can we, try to say, as you said, this is really the house of Allah. You come here to meditate, to reflect, to pray, and they can do that. And my sister, believe me, will never change.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm feeling judging right now, but I mean, this is the house of Allah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can be quiet in a big seminar of 500,000 people outside of the mosque, why is the mosque a place for us to socialize all of a sudden?
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, that's true. And the Prophet said it's a sign of the Day of Judgment. رَفْعُ الْأَصْوَاتِ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, right? The voices will be raised in the masjid. To take practical means of solution, to go to the administration, or go to the imam themselves and just say that we have this problem, right? Can we put up signs or something? To take practical steps, but then people are people. Okay. Yes, Sufyan?
You mentioned about voices being raised in the mosque with the judgment. But the thing with mosques sometimes, right, even outside the prayer areas, that they're places to socialize and meet up people, mentors you haven't seen in a long time.
That's true.
But sometimes due to the issue of space, right, the prayer area might be the only place where you could see where you could say salams, or a place to socialize.
Yeah.
Well, like how do you make a fine line between
Yeah, so the problem is not the socializing. Like, you can sit down, right, as they say, inside voices, right? Sit down and talk quietly. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Especially, but not like in the front saf where people would normally go and do their prayer. If they came into the masjid, they would go pray. Sit in the corner and sit on the side. The Sahaba used to do it. They would sit in the masjid and talk with the Prophet. They said that we used to talk about worldly things, and the Prophet would talk with us about worldly things. If we talked about food, he would talk to us about food. Right? And that was in the masjid. Right? But raising one's voice, talking loudly, excessive laughter in the masjid, right? Anything that would distract others. I think simple, quiet talk between two people or a few people does not distract anybody in the masjid. Right? Even like religious things, like somebody has a class in the corner, right? That's not distracting to people praying, or somebody's reading Quran, right? Mildly loud, right? Not really loud, but it wouldn't be distracting per se. But like one of the very few times I've seen one of our teachers be quite stern was they were having a class, a public class, and there was a few teenagers in the back, like giggling and laughing, right? So they took the proper steps. They had someone come and say, like, come, please join the class, right? Don't be distracting. Right? But they continued. They told the guy to go away, and they continued. So the teacher, he stopped the class, a very stern but dignified voice. He said, "Amma tasma'? Do you not listen? Right? Amma tastami'? Are you not going to listen? Amma tantafi'? Are you not going to benefit? Amma tartafi'? Are you not going to be elevated?" Because these are gatherings which angels surround. Right? And to divorce oneself from that benefit is, right, either just go somewhere else. You don't have to be here and do that. It's not like we came to your house and started a class. Right? Right, so sometimes etiquette, as we mentioned, needs to be taught. Sometimes it's stern, but there's a difference between discipline and punishing. And we have this like punishment. Right? Punish you. Right? Ta'deeb in Arabic is punishment. Ta'deeb is to teach etiquette. But the purpose of disciplining a child or a student, right, is to teach them what not to do next time. Yeah.
Well, I see in the PowerPoint, in the bullet points that keep your eyes downcast. Now, in terms of cultural issues, let me speak with elders in the East, right? We tend to look down or not look at them straight in the eye, but in the West, if we're talking to a senior person in profession, right, we have to look them in the face, right? Or if somebody's not looking, we look them in the face rather than looking down. So, what is there only one way, or like a right way to do it?
Yeah, so I mean, some of these we mentioned before are contextual. So in some cultures, that looking directly at somebody is disrespectful, right? Like as we mentioned, that the Sahaba, they didn't stare at the Prophet, right? Even when he spoke. They would look at him, glance and look away. But they wouldn't stare him down, like, kind of like a staring contest, right? But in some cultures, if you don't look somebody in the eye, you're not respected. Like if you don't shake somebody's hand firmly and look them right in the eye, then right, they would think less of you. Right, so it's contextual. Some of these are universal, and some of these are according to the time of Imam al-Ghazali, right? But they do have their place in many cultures, and especially Islamic cultures of study. That generally people would still do this even till today. Right? But like with elders and parents, it's according to what you know that they would deem respectful, right? To treat somebody in a way that they would deem respectful. So we were going to go into the last one, which is etiquettes of the child with the parents, right? And it goes the other way as well, right? Etiquettes of the parents to the children. And I have seen, alhamdulillah, many of the great scholars and teachers of Tareem, like Habib Kazim, right, Habib Hassan al-Hadi, right, Sheikh Umar Khatib, that the way that they treat their children is amazing. And just the respect that they have just for their children. Right? And they understand that their children are children. So their respect for them is also treating them in a way that would not cause them to disrespect the parent. So kind of not allowing them to disrespect the parent, because for instance, to be more clear with an example, they won't tell the child to do something. They don't do that. Right? Because if they say no, right, that's disrespectful, right? And that's disobedience. If they're old enough to be accountable for it, that will be disobedience. Right? If it's something that's not against the Sharia, or something permissible, right? But they would say, "Ish ra'yuk? What's your opinion? Do you think you should do this? Right? Ish ra'yuk? Tatabi ma'amuk? Right? What's your opinion? Should you go with your mother?" Right? And the kids would do it. Right? It's known to be a command, but it's not worded as a command. Right? Ish ra'yuk? Ta'ti bil kas ma'? What do you think? You should bring water for the guests? Right? There's a really beautiful video of Habib Ali Jifri teaching a class, and his son comes up, right? He sits on his father's lap, and he starts whispering in his father's ear. So Habib, he's listening, talking, right? Gives him attention, answers, and then goes back to the class, right? And then the kid taps him again. He starts talking to him, whispering, right? He answers the question again. Then he goes back to class, taps him again, and he says, "I want to speak," in the microphone. So he says, "Go ahead, speak." Right? But in that video, he said, "Ish ra'yuk? Nastamir ma'a dars?" What's your opinion? Do you think we should finish the class? These people came from very far to come listen in the class. Do you think we should finish? So it's kind of a teaching, empowering. Yeah?
And so I say to my son, don't you think it's a good idea, or would you like to bring the water to the guests? And he says, no, I don't want to. What's the next step?
Yeah, that depends on their age and depends on...
That's true. You could just say, okay,
right.
Well, I'll go and get it.
Yeah.
Be an example.
Yeah. Why don't we go get it together?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Right. But what they would do is they will explain the wisdom now. Like, these people came from far and they came to listen to class. Do you think we should continue? It's kind of training their intellect to work, right, to see things in the full picture. And sometimes kids are just kids. They don't want to do anything. MashaAllah. So, alhamdulillah, so we'll save this for next class, inshallah. I want to hear your opinions about this as well. And who here has children? 1, 2, 3. Okay. MashaAllah. So probably about a little bit less than half. Right.